This is why you have queers for Palestine and feminists for Palestine, all socialists for Palestine, which people think is moronic because why don't you understand how things are really at Gaza or the West Bank? I'm like, no. The people who think it's stupid are the ones who don't understand, because this is a sinister logic at work. Palestine has become just the shorthand for utopia.
I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Einat Wilf, a leading Israeli thinker, author, and former Knesset member. In our conversation, we talked a lot about the narrative manipulation about Israel and why some people are so prone to believe falsehoods. Of course, we also talked about the recent ceasefire and what that means for the region. What will it take for a lasting peace? And is peace even possible? Dr. Wilf has an impressive and wide-ranging background. She served as an intelligence officer for an elite IDF unit, earned degrees from Harvard, INSEAD, and Cambridge, and went on to serve in Israel's parliament with a focus on education, foreign affairs, and the Jewish world. She's the author of several influential books, including My Israel, Our Generation, and the War of Return, which explore the challenges of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the future of Zionism. Known for her sharp intellect and independent voice, Dr. Wilf continues to shape global conversations about Israel, democracy, and Jewish identity. I found our conversation to be fascinating, and I hope you do too. First of all, it's an honor to be speaking with you. And also, this is amazing timing because we are speaking just a few days after the ceasefire has gone into effect. I'd love to start with your initial reaction to the situation in which we find ourselves right now.
First of all, there's no doubt there's a remarkable achievement that the American president was able to kind of cobble together an agreement where we received all the living hostages at once without grotesque ceremonies. We are beginning to get the remains of the ones who were murdered. And at least there is a path that, if followed, could create a better future for all. So it's a moment of achievement. It's a moment of opportunity. But of course, it's also a moment where many things could go wrong.
The last time I remember feeling this sense of optimism was in 1993 after the Oslo Accords. I'm wondering if you see this, and we all know how that turned out, which was very badly. I'm wondering if this is similar or different in your historical opinion.
It's different on a few levels. The Oslo Accords came against a background in which Israelis were very sympathetic to what they believed was the Palestinian cause, that it was a cause of a people seeking freedom, dignity, statehood, sovereignty, next to a Jewish state. Now, almost all Israelis, unfortunately, finally understand that the Palestinian cause has been tragically the cause of destroying the Jewish state rather than building one for themselves. Whereas in the early 90s, the Palestinians perhaps had a sense of achievement from the First Intifada. I think now more might understand, even if they don't say it, that they have experienced defeat. And there is an American president, unlike it was in the 90s, who understands that the path to any kind of breakthrough depends on the Arabs in general, and certainly the Palestine Arabs, understanding that the Jews are not an aberration in the region, but very much are here to stay, and that the region will need to organize itself around the knowledge that Israel is a permanent fixture of the Middle East. So I would say this gives more, if anything, it should be cause for greater optimism. The things that are parallel and are cause for concern is the ambiguity and the fuzziness of the 20-point plan. I've written extensively on the fact that what I believe the key thing that doomed the Oslo Accords is what was called constructive ambiguity. The idea that you fudge the key issues in order to get the sides to agree and so-called build trust. And we know that the opposite happened. And this is why my recommendation is that Israel should pierce through the constructive ambiguity was good to bring about the one non-ambiguous result of the release of the living hostages. But it cannot be a structure going forward. So I think it is necessary for Israel, even if it makes people uncomfortable, to pierce through the constructive ambiguity, which is destructive, and engage in something that I've come to call constructive specificity. Israel has to make it very clear that ultimately the ideology of Palestinianism, the singular obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state, what the Palestinian cause really is, that ideology has to die, including all its foundations, the perpetual refugeehood, the so-called right of return, UNRWA, that anything that sustains and fuels that ideology has to close down, and that not a single thing can be built in Gaza. No country can be involved in rebuilding in Gaza if they're sustaining the infrastructure of Palestinianism.
You've written extensively about the refugee issue and UNRWA, and now we have this situation where people are talking about, I don't know if refugee is the right word, but displaced Palestinians. How do we prevent from putting ourselves in a situation now that repeats the disastrous process of UNRWA?
That is exactly the risk. The pattern that has marked the conflict for the last century is every time the Arabs went to a war of annihilation, and unfortunately they never went to any other kind of wars, and lost. And if there's one thing we can say for certain, the Arabs lost the war that they launched on October 7th to bring about the annihilation of Israel, which is what they tried to do. I would argue that they came as close to it as anyone before them, but in that, they were absolutely and completely and unambiguously defeated. The problem is that every time that they were defeated in previous rounds of their wars of annihilation, every time they were salvaged by various powers and interests who basically told them, no, you weren't defeated in your moronic war to try to annihilate the Jewish state. And you don't have to come to terms with your defeat and build a new future. Your victory has merely been delayed. That's all. So try again. And the Arabs are a logical people, so they've been trying again ever since. The reason I've devoted so much of my life to UNRWA is that UNRWA is literally the thing that sits at the original sin that told the Arabs, the Palestine Arabs, you were not defeated in your moronic war to try to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state on a rump area of the land. You bear no responsibility for that stupid choice. You didn't really lose. Your victory is merely delayed. So try again. And that's what they've been trying to do ever since, courtesy of Western funding of UNRWA. So the question is, will we be able to ensure that this time around we break the pattern and the Gazans do not get the message of try again, that they get the message that the ruin in Gaza is entirely the outcome of their disastrous choice to launch an invasion into Israel, and that they need to come to terms with that choice, and that they only can build a new future if they understand for good and for all that the only future they can have is in Gaza, not from the river to the sea. They're not Palestine refugees. There is no such thing as a right to settle in Israel, what they call the right of return. And the only future they can ever have is in Gaza and Gaza only. And that's the message that has to be heard loud, clear, and specific as people talk about the future of Gaza.
Do you think that message is coming across? Because if you go onto social media, you can get whatever narrative is in your bubble.
Not enough, not even a lot, which is again why I think it is incumbent upon Israel as the country that suffers the most as a result of the repeated wars that the Arabs launch again and again. They suffer as well, but they seem to want to do it again, and we don't want them to do it again. So I think it's high time that we actually take active steps to break that deadly pattern and send a clear message that says, enough is enough. There was a very interesting moment a few months ago. I think it was on May 8th, the day that is celebrated as the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. And it happened to be also the day that the current German chancellor was in the White House. And there was a press conference, and somehow it was mentioned that today is the day of the Allied victory over the Nazis. And President Trump turns to the German chancellor and says, "Not a good day for you, huh?" And the German chancellor actually said, "It was a great day, because from that day, we began to build the Germany that we are today." And I remember looking at that and thinking, that's what we need here. We need for Palestine Arabs to look at, I don't know, October 13th or whatever it is, and say, this was a great day when we were defeated, because from that day, we built a new future, we became a different people, and we finally let go of a century-long obsession with undoing the Jewish state. That's the future we need to imagine.
So you're talking about the denazification of Germany. How do we take what we learned from that process to the de-radicalization of Gaza? Because we know that it runs deep from birth.
As I said, I focus on three things: no refugees, no return, no UNRWA. It's really, really simple in that sense, because yes, you can talk about books and education and all that, but all of those are layered upon the fundamental element of legitimacy that gives Palestinianism its cover, its legitimacy, its fuel. That needs to be dried up. If you dry up that fuel, if you make it clear to the people of Gaza, no one in Gaza is a Palestine refugee. You do not possess a right to settle in Israel. And UNRWA, as an institution that legitimizes those dangerous ideas, is gone. Those are the three things that need to happen. They're not small things, but they're simple and they're clear. If that is achieved, that will basically that will create de-radicalization. And then you can do the books and the education, but you will have a soil from which to work.
Which is interesting, because we have something today that we did not have then, which is social media and the internet. And I'm seeing that a lot of people are radicalized through the internet. And there's even a trend happening right now in which what we're seeing, some Gazans are calling themselves Gazan Holocaust survivors. How do you fight this type of insidious online radicalization? How do you stop that?
I would say three elements. The first is to expose the broader mechanism that is at work. It's a perfect example that the entire Palestinian cause is the cause of erasure of Jewish sovereignty. So basically, you can see again and again from the word Palestine itself. It all goes down to that. The word Palestine itself is a hijacked word that was in the past associated almost exclusively with Jewish history and Jewish self-determination, and was hijacked in order to erase Jewish history. So you can really go very methodically through the creation of Palestinianism as an identity, as an ideology, to see that it's always built as a project of erasure. And one of the ways you do that is you constantly abuse and misuse words. And it's a way to really expose Palestinianism for what it is, as a project of destruction and erasure rather than a project of self-determination, liberty, and statehood.
Can you take us through some of that? Because I know some of the viewers don't have the background. Like, they hear the words like genocide and apartheid and Gaza Holocaust, and they think, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Can you explain why that is anti-Semitic and why that is not the case? And also the insidious nature behind it. Like that, for example, when Greta Thunberg calls herself a kidnapped victim, that is deliberate.
Of course. So again, we need to understand, like you said, that it's all deliberate. It's all based on erasure, inversion, and hijacking. The process behind it is something that I've written and spoken a lot. I've called it the placard strategy. It's been at work for decades. I call it that because it's easily seen on placards and anti-Israel demonstrations. Those placards are visually very simple. They are built as equations where Israel, Zionism, or sometimes just a drawn Star of David are equated with a litany of words, ultimately 10 words, no more. Colonialism, racism, apartheid, escalates ethnic cleansing, Nazism, genocide, Holocaust. These words are chosen not because they reflect reality. They are always the inversion of reality. Zionism is the most decolonial, anti-imperial movement, save Jews from conditions of apartheid in the Arab world, from ethnic cleansing in the Arab world in Europe, from genocide in Europe. It's the inversion of reality, but those words are chosen because they are all synonymous with evil. And the way that the placard strategy has worked through decades of repetition, through decades of giving it academic and institutional respectability by inserting it into the UN, into so-called human rights groups, into academia, is creating an increasingly global mindset that believes that Israel, Zionism, Star of David are so evil that the only way that the world will ever be a better place if that evil is eradicated. And that is, of course, the most ancient idea when it comes to the collective Jew, that whether it's religious salvation or racial purity in the case of the Nazis, or supposedly a human rights perfect world as we are today, again, it's no coincidence that the collective Jew, Israel, Zionism, Star of David, are equated with the most evil words, and that Palestinianism, as the project of its erasure, is associated with only positive words: justice, equality, freedom, rights. So this is how you posit it, and then you create the notion that the world would be a better place without the collective Jew, and therefore, because salvation, utopia awaits on the other side of that, by any means necessary is legitimate. Whatever is needed to eradicate that evil becomes legitimate. And this is what's at play. So when people say that it's anti-Semitic, they think of anti-Semitism as, something social. I don't hate Jews, or I'm like, no. Anti-Semitism is this. It's the political idea, or even you could say the theological idea, that a better world awaits on the other side of ridding the world of the collective Jew. This is the ideology that has always animated the greatest atrocities committed against the Jews, because once you tell people that a better world awaits them on the other side of that, they're going to want that. This is why you have queers for Palestine and feminists for Palestine, all socialists for Palestine, which people think is moronic because, wow, don't you understand how things are really at Gaza or the West Bank? I'm like, no. The people who think it's stupid are the ones who don't understand, because this is a sinister logic at work that says that utopia awaits on the other side of the eradication of the collective Jew. So all the people who've associated themselves with utopian causes, therefore, have kind of gathered themselves around, this is why everyone says everything is now Palestine, because Palestine has become just the shorthand for utopia, which sounds weird, but this is what's going on, because Palestine is essentially the erasure of the collective Jew, which means that utopia awaits us on the other side of the collective Jew. So people need to understand that this is what's at play. And I will say where I do find some hope. So up until now, just spoke about exposing the mechanism of the erasure of the collective Jew, exposing the mechanism of the Palestinian cause as the hijacking and erasure of Jewish sovereignty. But the other thing is, and where I find hope, is that it really reaches such depth of ridiculousness that there is a contingency of people that I'm seeing that are saying, okay, you're ridiculous. And that at least creates an opening for people to say, I'm going to listen to what some people told me about kind of the Palestinian cause not being this kind of innocent cause of liberation of an oppressed people of the thing, but actually a cause of destruction and erasure of another people.
Because it seems like, how can you even talk to somebody that is saying such ridiculous things? And it also feels as though this concept has infiltrated humanitarian spaces. We saw that Hamas took over World Central Kitchen trucks. We see Hamas sympathizers in the UN, and we're seeing all of this infiltration. How do we even begin as Jews to combat this narrative when people say, oh, you don't believe, we'll give you UN stats, you don't believe it. Oh, this university, you don't believe it. Oh, this news source, you don't believe it. Because these are all places that were considered educational or scholarly. And if we don't believe that, then what? You don't believe anything just because you don't like what we're saying? How do you even begin to respond to somebody that says that?
So first of all, you're right. This is how the strategy works. The strategy works by surrounding the Jews with this notion of, like, obviously everybody knows that the Jews are the ones that are made to feel that they're the crazy ones. It can't be that everyone says this. When I wrote about it in an essay called The Palestine Propaganda Complex, I quoted an essay from Ahad Ha'am, the Zionist writer in the late 19th century, where the essay was called Chatzi Nechama, half solace. And he spoke about the fact that he was living at a time when the walls of the ghetto were coming down, Jews were becoming integrated into mainstream society. And as a result, he feared that now that there were no walls between them and mainstream society, they would find themselves surrounded by what the mainstream Christian, but even secularized society thought about the evil nature of the Jew. And where did he find half solace? In the blood libel, the original one. Because he knew that Jews knew that the actual blood libel, the Jews drink the blood of non-Jewish children for their rituals, the Jews knew that it was wrong. So he found half solace in the fact that this would help steel Jews to the fact that the whole world could be wrong and they will be right when it comes to them. This is also what steels Jews to be great scientists and, people who challenge conventional wisdom. But it's hard, and a lot of people buckle, and a lot of people fall because it's really hard to stand against that. But I heard a lecture once that distilled a book about mass manipulation and crowd kind of manipulation. And the argument was that how do you create mass manipulation? And we're living now through mass manipulation. They said, look, simple messages. Zionism, Israel, Star of David equals colonialism, apartheid, racism, genocide. That's simple. Strong visual symbols. The placards, very simple. Star of David equals swastika, really simple. So strong visual messages. The third was constant repetition. And that's what we see. Repetition in media, social media, everywhere. And the most important element was prestige. What they said, and this is something that every Madison Avenue executive has known, prestige paralyzes judgment. Oh, Harvard said it. Oh, the UN said it. Then therefore you suspend judgment. And this is why the strategy, the placard strategy that was really originated by the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s, all the words are already there, genocide and Holocaust. Anyone who thinks they're saying anything new and original and brave now should learn some history. And they went methodically kind of rebranding the old Tsarist anti-Semitism because they know that it is the one virus that can drive their enemies to the ground. They successfully did that with Germany. I think that's what they're trying now to do with America and the West. Even if the Soviet Union is long gone, the strategy is now already in operation. They're the ones that began the laundering of Zionism as racism through the UN in the 70s, and then Israel's an apartheid state in the UN convention, and academic. They gave all these things this academic cachet, which they exported to left-wing academic circles in the West, and from that it went to kind of the Anglo-West. So yeah, I agree with you. Jews are once again forced to be in the position that everyone thinks, it sounds conspiratorial, it sounds crazy, but we need to steel ourselves to know that, yes, there are those moments that the world gets whipped up to this mass manipulation, that utopia awaits on the other side of getting rid of the collective Jew. And we need to understand that, yeah, everyone is wrong and we're right.
How do you stop the train? Because we've seen this movie before, and it led to the Holocaust. And I think a lot of people are very worried about what happens next when the whole world is against us.
First of all, say people are rightfully worried. It doesn't have to just end, in the gas chambers. This thing operated in the Soviet Union and in the Arab world and in Iran. And, the Jews, the only difference from the 30s is at this time the Jews had a state. America was willing to let them in. So the only thing that happened, the only thing is that the Arab world was emptied of its Jews. Iran was emptied of its Jews, the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Venezuela. Some universities are now going through this process, but the Jews survive somewhere else. So it doesn't always have to be the crematoria, but yes, it's very worrying because you will not find a single instance where a society begins to go through this mass manipulation and somehow Jews thrive under that. It just doesn't happen. Even if Jews claim to be anti-Zionist. You know how many Jews claim to be anti-Zionist communists in Iraq and in Morocco and in Egypt and in the Soviet Union? Didn't help them. At the end of the day, they were Jews. So people are rightfully worried. And I think it does matter that there is a state. I actually think in many ways what the American president did with the 20-point plan is that he tried to put a brake on this gathering storm and buy Israel and the Jewish people some respite. But we need to now use it to really turn back the tide, both in America and in the West, and I would say in the Arab world.
In the Anu Museum, they have a presentation where you can see all of the places. You can see kind of how many Jews were in what countries during I don't remember what it is, 100-year span difference. And you can see that all of the, Middle East countries were emptied of their Jews, and then they had to go somewhere. So America got Jews, Canada, Australia, and those numbers went up. It was just interesting to see.
Israel.
Now, of course, Israel went up significantly, right? And now we're seeing people talking in America and in France about wanting to leave, in the United Kingdom. And it reminds me of that presentation from the Anu Museum, which is like a big red flag for me.
Yeah. I mean, look, when I started a few years ago to participate in debates as anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. And after one debate in 2019, I would lose them all. You would bring the anti-Zionist Jew. This is why they're valuable, especially if they're articulate and charismatic, and be like, a Jew said it, so it has nothing to do with, it can't be against Jews. But after one such debate, when it was announced that we lost, it was in 2019 in London, the audience was very hostile. And I remember just having this sensation in the pit of my stomach that the glee with which the audience responded to our loss was not a normal debate response. It had just a pre-pogrom Eve energy to it. And I went back rattled from that debate and I said, okay, I'm going to ask a different question. Not in theory is anti-Zionism the same as anti-Semitism in every aspect. Said, I'm going to ask a very simple question. What happens to Jews when anti-Zionism becomes institutionalized? That it essentially becomes the law of the land, right? In Egypt and Iraq, they legislated against Zionism, literally did that. The Soviet Union legislated against Zionism. So what happens when it becomes institutionalized? And here, the track record is definite with no exceptions. The environment turns hostile to Jewish life, both individual and collective, even as the anti-Zionists claim we love Jews, we have nothing against Jews, Jews are great. And of course, if this is not stopped, then ultimately the Jews leave and no Jews are left.
In very simple terms, speaking to the Jews in America that have not experienced this type of displacement, can you just explain to them why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism?
Because anti-Zionism creates the same notion that the world would be a better place if the collective Jew no longer existed. That's it.
But people say, I'm not against the Jews, I'm just against Israel.
It doesn't matter. It's not individually. You might be a Jew yourself. You might think that you're participating in a discussion about Israel. It's bigger than any individual. It's a form of collective thinking that settles the notion that if only the collective Jew right now manifested in Israel and Zionism did not exist, then the world would be a better place.
So what kind of impact did this Hamas-Israel war have on the collective thinking that you're noticing?
Oh, it unleashed it, and I would argue it's not about what Israel did, it was about Israeli weakness. The reason that we saw the euphoria erupt on October 7th and 8th around the world, one of my favorite writers on this present moment, his name is Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour. He's an Egyptian who de-radicalized himself really through the power of critical thinking and thought. And he described those eruptions in the West as a collective participation in the pogrom. And he was correct, because a symbolic participation in the pogrom. Because basically what they saw on October 7th, and I know it's going to sound weird, what they saw through the GoPro cameras of Hamas streamed around the world, what they saw is the birth of utopia. They saw, by any means necessary, very brutal means, the ending and the eradication of the collective Jew. So this was the time for elation. And I follow a lot of anti-Israel accounts. That's how I know what they're thinking. So one of them, when the agreement was signed, the 20-point plan, he was furious. He's like this Israeli anti-Zionist Jew. And he was like, stupid Hamas and Arab countries. He was like, they just killed the momentum. There was momentum for Palestine. Everything was becoming Palestine. Israel was isolated. The world was turning against Israel. And you sold it out. And I thought it was fascinating because I think he was right that a lot of the people who symbolically participated in the pogrom on October 8th they began to smell and touch a world where the collective Jew would be eradicated. And that means that utopia, salvation are around the corner. And now that was yanked from them. That's not over. We got some respite, which we need to handle wisely, but they're all out of the woodworks, the people who think that utopia and a better world and human rights perfection awaits on the other side of the eradication of Zionism.
I'm also hearing people that are ecstatic, maybe naively thinking that Jews that are pro-Israel, getting messages from people in the States saying, oh, is it peace now? Is peace around the corner? To which I say, well, there are still bodies coming back. But what would you say to them?
I'll have a combined message. Obviously, it's not peace around the corner. Like you said, there's a lot of holes in the plan. There's a lot of ambiguity around there, which is not constructive, which could become very destructive as soon as everyone's own interpretation begins to clash. But it's not nothing. Because I followed President Trump for a while, he instinctively understands that at the core of the conflict, lies not Israeli and Jewish and Zionist intransigence, but the Arab, and especially the Palestine Arab obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. And he says that. He said it in the Knesset. Look at all the destruction that your anti-Semitism and your hatred and all that has brought you. And look at the countries that are letting go of that. They're building something, the Gulf countries that are somewhat letting go of that. So he understands that actually arming Israel and supporting Israel and a strong Israel is a better path to peace than pressuring Israel, making Israel look weak. Because when Israel's weak, like I said, the symbolic pogroms, all the people who believe that utopia awaits on the other side are they come out of the woodworks. So if anyone has a chance to actually bring peace, it is this American president, oddly, because he's addressing the correct dynamic. Now, I think a likely scenario is that there will be more agreements with Arab and Muslim countries. That's actually possible. But the only way that we begin to actually get to peace is if we address the ideology at the core. If we address the Arab, and especially the Palestinianist Arab, obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state, and replace it with an ideology that I've come to call Arab Zionism, an Arab and Islamic vision that basically says the Jews are not foreigners in the region. We, as Arabs and Muslims, from our own texts and traditions, we recognize the Jews as a people with a history and a culture and an unbroken attachment to this land, and we embrace Israel as the modern political expression of this connection. So that's the only way we get to real peace. But could we see, as a result of the American president's dynamic, could we see more agreement, let's say, with Arab and Muslim countries? That is something that I would say is likely.
You've said in the past that, and you were also part of this camp, that you at one time believed in a Palestinian state. If Israel was just give up the land, there would be a Palestinian state. And you've talked about how you realized that that wasn't the case and that you wanted to know what they wanted. What do you think they want now? And what do you think will lead to peace with the Palestinians?
Unfortunately, they still want the same thing. I've made it my life's work to listen to them very carefully. When I discovered that they have been saying all the time that they wanted the Jewish state to be gone, and they use words like return and perpetual refugeehood and from the river to the sea. They've been very consistent in both word and action for a century. And when I discovered that they've always said it, and it's only us Israelis, especially in the peace camp, who kind of heard what we wanted to hear, rather than to listen to what they said, from that moment on, I've made it my business to listen to what they say very carefully. And for example, even if you hear criticism of Hamas today, it's criticism of the Hamas failure to bring about the end of the Jewish state. So they're angry at the ruin, at the destruction, but they're not questioning the ideology. I always bring the example of, today people think the Nakba was some story of innocent Arabs being dispossessed by evil Zionists. But in real time, when people knew what actually happened, when it was an Arab war to destroy a nascent Jewish state, the person who coined the term, the Nakba, the disaster, the Arab intellectual Constantine Zurek, he describes the Nakba, the disaster, as the following. He says, 7 Arab armies attempted to subdue Zionism, basically send the Jews back to their inferior place in Arab and Muslim society. He says, 7 armies went to subdue Zionism, so there was no question that the Arab armies invaded and attempted that, and returned on their heels impotent. So the disaster is the failure to subdue and defeat the lowly Jews, the Jews for the Arab and Muslim world for 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 years knew as the dispossessed low people that they could humiliate at will. So that was the Nakba. Okay, so he writes a whole book. And the whole book it's a long essay book, not for a moment does he question the goal of subduing Zionism. The entire book is very critical of Arab society, and you can say, oh wow, a book that is critical of Arabs. It's critical of the Arab society, and it says we're not sufficiently modern, we're not sufficiently united, but it's all about we need to do better next time. If we do all these things, next time we'll be able to defeat the Jews. But nowhere does he say, actually, it's a stupid goal. Like, why are we even pursuing that goal? That does not happen. So again, you're seeing the same dynamic. And it relates to what I said in the beginning, that you need an ideological change. Right now, I'm not hearing voices, public voices, and in the Arab world, only public voices matter. I'm not hearing public voices that say, enough. What a stupid goal and vision to which to devote our lives. Can we please just focus on building for ourselves rather than destroying the Jewish state? Those voices, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, but that's it. You're not seeing a kind of real change, which is why, again, the Gazans, the Arabs in the West Bank and Jordan, they need to understand that this time will not be the repeat of the pattern of try again, try again. So in order to reach peace, This ideology has to change, which actually means nothing less than the transformation of what has become the Palestinian identity, away from destroying what the Jews have built into building something for themselves. It's a tall order, I'm under no illusion, but that's the only thing that moves us to a different future, the only thing.
We're seeing the individual voices that are speaking out against Hamas, or the ones that have been excommunicated from the Arab or disowned from the Arab community. We're also hearing from Hamas, Palestinianism. We're hearing we're going to do October 7th again and again and again and again. What are we supposed to make of that?
As I said, listen to them. Really, seriously. I spent a few years as an officer in the Israeli intelligence 30 years ago. When I left, I said, look, we don't need so much money to get secret intelligence stuff. They're telling us very clearly what they're going to do. We just be like, nah, that can't be, they can't be serious. They don't really think they can defeat us.
They don't really mean it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're saying what to make of it? Make of it exactly what they're saying. Unless we hear different voices, and what you said about the social pressure against different voices. This is why what gets said in the Arab world publicly is the only thing that matters. Because when things are said publicly, you know that the social fabric has changed. Unless it gets said publicly, then you know there hasn't been any change. If someone tells you something private in a room, in the Western culture, if things are secrets, we value them. Oh, that must mean they're true. But in the Arab culture, only things that are said publicly are valuable. Anything that gets said privately, worthless. So until we hear public voices that are not immediately killed or excommunicated, but that they begin to write essays and books and appear on Arab television and say, it was a stupid idea, we wasted a century, societies that follow anti-Zionism are loser societies. You cannot point to a single society in the Arab world that somehow did better by anti-Zionism. The only societies that are doing better are the ones that are actually letting go of anti-Zionism as a defining feature of an Arab identity. And we want that. When we start hearing those voices, then we know that change is happening. I believe that we need to help those voices by essentially depriving the fuel that sustains the dominant ideology of destroying the Jewish state.
What is the fuel?
Perpetual refugeehood, return, UNRWA.
Got it. Can you comment on the sentiment that I'm feeling here in Israel? I've talked to Israelis and they've said that maybe this peace deal will give them 5 years of respite, 10 years of respite. Israelis don't believe that this is it.
Of course, this is also the traditional way of Israel thinking about wars. I mean, because the Jews are a tiny, tiny minority in an Arab and Islamic world that is still largely hostile to our very existence, Israelis have traditionally thought about wars as buying a decade of quiet, 5 years of quiet, that's about it. My argument, and this is where I appeal to Israelis in Israel, is we need to start behaving differently. We need to stop purchasing 5-10-year chunks of time, and we need to start investing in lasting transformations. And even peace with Egypt is not a lasting transformation in the sense that Egypt still remains one of the most radicalized anti-Semitic societies in the world, and certainly in the Arab world. And we have done nothing to challenge that. Egypt goes against Israel in every international body. The Egyptian army trains against Israel. This was they're not training against Libya or anything. And we call it peace because, and this is something that I'm critical of in Israel, despite the fact that we've come to Israel to finally have a permanent home, we still retain the Jewish exilic mindset of nowhere is really home and everywhere is temporary. So let's just make sure we have another 5 or 10 years of quiet. And my argument is that within Israel, we need to start to be long-term people who shape a different future. And when people hear my crazy words about Arab Zionism, they're like, Einat, never. I'm like, never is a long time. We have time. That's it. We're here to stay, so we have time, which means that we're going to start, a journey of, 1,000 miles starts with one step. we're going to start with 1, 2, 3 steps to begin to chip away at Palestinianism, at perpetual refugeehood, at UNRWA, at return. That's it. We're going to become that people. That's what I'm arguing for in Israel.
Now that you've explained to us what the process needs to be, I want to just pivot real quick because a lot of people listen to know what it's like here. And I think it's really interesting. I'd love for you to comment on this. You've seen the signs all over Israel. Cyrus is here, with a picture of Trump. And I think Americans don't understand that because he's very unpopular. Well, he's popular. I would say he's divisive.
Yeah.
Polarizing in the United States. People can't fathom that. And he's also on the same side of the political spectrum as Netanyahu, although when Witkoff went to Hostages Square, Netanyahu got lots of boos and Trump got lots of cheers. Can you explain that to this diaspora audience, please?
I know it's weird, but actually in Israel, the polarizing figure in Trump is actually amazingly a unifying figure. I was again present at his speech in the Knesset, and it was remarkable to watch. He gave the hostage families and everyone who fought for them, like you said, in hostage squares and night after night and, on Shabbat evenings. And also through retweeting the images from the demonstrations, he gave them the sense that they were seen, that they mattered, and that they had impact and that they were vindicated because a deal happened. But he also praised Israel's military might and the soldiers of the IDF. And he praised Netanyahu. And he gave the Israelis from that side who believed that it was Israeli might and the fighting spirit and the soldiers who brought the hostages back. He gave them a sense that they were being seen and vindicated. And I was sitting there and I was like, wow, everyone feels that they're seen and vindicated. Even the funny things that he did when he told Netanyahu that Lapid is, the head of the opposition. He's a nice guy. You can be nicer to him.
Oh, that was hilarious.
It was hilarious. And even, on the one hand, he spoke again about the might of Israel and the weapons and that Israel fought bravely. But then he said, look, you can't continue the war forever. You had to end it. Now you have to make peace. So the peace now people, they were retweeting him like crazy. But of course, the people that think that Israeli might is how you get to peace were retweeting him like crazy. So yes, I know it's really odd from the American perspective that such a polarizing figure is actually here, the most unifying figure we've had for a while.
Wow. Do you have any final words for us?
You know what? I actually want to say something that is a real, I've been saying it in some of my lectures abroad and my meetings. We focus a lot on the things that divide us and the Jews that have sold us out and that succumb to the pressure to say the worst about Israel and Zionism. But what I mostly saw in the last 2 years was something very different. For most Israelis, they knew that there's Jews, in America and Canada, but that was it. But since October 7th, there has been a personal mobilization, which was not just about money and sending equipment. Every single community that I went to and I spoke in the last 2 years always told me about, we just adopted survivors of the Nova Festival and we're helping with PTSD with soldiers and we've adopted hostage families and we're working with that. And I think this will have lasting impact, that Jews in Israel and non-Jews also understand that Jews abroad that we really are one fabric and there is a real meaning to this solidarity. And yeah, we all, as pun intended, are cross to bear, are those who sell us out and succumb to the pressure. But ultimately, what I saw was just remarkable mobilization and solidarity. And I think this will have greater lasting effect than the Jews for Mamdani or the Jews for genocide or something.
I think those Jews, I've spoken about those. I feel like it's everybody's responsibility to pull them in because it seems like they sell us out because they don't know where they come from. They don't know that they are part of us.
Yeah, I always tell people, right now, you're not going to convince them, but one day they'll realize something will happen that will make them realize that they were only being used. And then when they want their way back, make sure they have a path back.
What an honor. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Einat Wilf is the author of The War of Return and other publications.
Yes.
Many. And thank you for explaining everything so eloquently.
Thank you. My pleasure entirely.